Editor of African Liberty, Ibrahim Anoba, joins us from Baltimore via Skype for discussions on the political tension in Tunisia. Good to have you join us, Ibrahim Anoba. Now, in July, President Saied suspended parliament. He sacked the prime minister and assumed executive authority. Now he's not ruling by the decree. It seems to tip the balance of power in his favor. So how do you read this?
First of all, I think what is playing out in Tunisia at the moment is quite unfortunate. I mean, you look at President Kaïs Saied and you think of the best person who could bring Tunisia back from the chaos that it went through from 2011 up to 2014. I mean, this is someone that was at some point president of the Tunisian Constitutional Law Association for about 24 years. He was a constitutional law professor at the University of Sousse, at the University of Carthage for many, many years as well. So if you're looking for someone who should protect the constitution, who should be in favor of the rule of law, you want to think about someone like President Kaïs Saied. But what he's currently doing, I mean, the summary assumption of all powers, firing of the prime minister, seizure of the powers of the parliament, and saying it was going to be ruling by decree. These are things you can never imagine, and I guess in this case, Tunisians will never imagine that will come from Kaïs Saied. But as they say, you can never trust anybody in politics, particularly in African politics.
And it's interesting you mentioned that revolution, which is the Tunisian Revolution, also popularly called the Jasmine Revolution. And it's funny because it's just almost 10 years now. In December, it will be 10 years after that revolution. Do you think that 10 years after, we're now seeing protests on the street? Do you think that Tunisia is back to being a dictatorship and that the country is entering a new phase of political instability?
I mean, even though the current situation or the crisis may point to that direction, I'm strongly optimistic, simply because Tunisians of the 21st century are one of the most radical set of people you can ever find on the African continent. They will never leave anything to the government to go away with. I mean, of course, as you rightly pointed, the Jasmine Revolution was pretty much the foundation of the Arab Spring. And ever since, they've always been protests in Tunisia. 8 months ago, there were massive protests against police brutality, against the biting measures as a result of COVID lockdown. Recently, there were protests because of the economic situation as well. And now, protests against Kaïs Saied. Remember, in July, when Kaïs Saied announced these incredible measures, a lot of people supported him. The same people, ironically, who went to the streets of Tunis are joyous and supporting the measure by the president are pretty much the same people now calling on him to come to his normal sense. This just goes to tell you that the Tunisians wouldn't let anything for granted if you go by their recent actions in the last 10 years.
Let's also state that there are people who actually support this move by President Saied, because they cite the economic downturn, issues around corruption and the poor handling of the coronavirus as one of the reasons they support him. We saw the counter-protest in Tunisia while there was a protest against his move. But let's also look at the fact that there's also political fragmentation, especially with the leading party, where some have now resigned because of this move. So do you think that this protest will yield any result in terms of getting President Saied to overturn his decision?
Well, I think the one thing we really have to be hopeful for is that there won't be counter-protests on the streets of Tunis. I mean, pretty much the larger number of those protesting right now, this morning, in Tunisia, are those that are not in support of the move by the president. But there could be those in support going to the streets, and if that happens, then we can see, or we can possibly see a deployment of the military. But besides that, as you rightly said, the mood within the opposition, ironically, another, is pretty much one of lack of doing enough. More than the other people resigned on Saturday, the top echelon of the party, primarily because they thought the party wasn't doing enough. But also, you really have to consider that before President Saied took these measures, the ENADA and the presidency were pretty much fighting against each other. The Speaker of the House, Rashid, Mr. Rashid, and Mr. Machichi, who was the Prime Minister, just couldn't agree with the president. And Tunisians were looking forward to these three people to solve the economic crisis, to bring the country out of COVID-19, to make sure that the constitution agreed in 2014 was put right in place to bring the Tunisian political system back to normalcy. But that never happened. And the president felt he has to take the onus upon himself to fire the prime minister and freeze the power of the parliament. But again, as much as these may appear as good measures, or in some quarters in Tunisia, it is still a violation of the constitution. It is still a violation of the hard work that the young people in Tunisia fought for in 2011.
And it's funny because 2 months after, people were expecting that President Saied would come up with new resolutions or decisions in terms of reinstating the parliament, probably getting a new prime minister, appointing a new prime minister, but that hasn't happened. Do you think that he really believes that he can wait this out, or that he's just probably living now in denial as to how this plays out in the end?
I mean, this is why it's called a constitutional coup. Remember, when this happened in July, as I said earlier, a lot of people were in support because they thought the parliament and the prime minister were just not doing enough to bring the country to out of the COVID-19 mess. But again, they were expecting that the president was going to follow those actions with positive actions by appointing a new prime minister or doing something to point to normalization of the democratic process. But that hasn't happened since July, and this is why people believe that President Kaïs Saied is not interested in normalizing democracy in Tunisia. They thought he was simply interested in summarily assuming more and more power as things progresses. But again, the protest that we are seeing today is a consequence of that, and I do not anticipate that the protesters will be going anywhere, and I do not anticipate things will get any easy for Kaïs Saied. It can only get much more pressurized for him.
Just let's expand this a little bit more to the Maghreb region. We see what's happening with Angola, Algeria rather, and Morocco, with now the cut in diplomatic ties and the ban of flights from the Algeria airspace, from flights from Morocco in Algeria's airspace. And I was seeing what's playing out in Tunisia, what has been playing out in Tunisia since July. Do you think that somehow, or maybe there is some level of political instability in the Maghreb region?
I mean, pressure, certainly there is. You look at the region itself, the biggest powers, apart from Egypt, you talk about Algeria, Tunisia, these are two of the strongest economies, two of the strongest countries when it comes to socio-political stability before 2011. And it's just so unfortunate that both countries, in fact, I want to add Morocco to it, that the three countries are going through some turmoil at this point. But again, this points to the enormity of work that the Arab League has to do. And I think leaders like Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in Egypt and elsewhere really need to come to terms with the reality in the region that if you do not help Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia solve this crisis they are going through at this point, things could easily snowball into other countries in the region, or worst case, make worse the current migration crisis that we're seeing across the Mediterranean. So whichever way you want to look at it, this is more of an external political challenge for the Arab nations and the Middle East, as much as it is an internal political challenge for Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria.
Just a lot to watch out for in the coming days and coming months. Editor, African Liberty, Ibrahim Anoba, thanks for talking to us.
Always.